Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshack if you want to call me by my in-game name. And in this video, we're going to talk about, in my opinion, the top 5 best budget-based aggressive Hearthstone decks. I know that was a lot. But basically, for those of you who are unfamiliar with how we do our top 5 deck slots, we're now going to be going over the top 5 aggro, which would be the aggressive versions, which is this video, then mid-range and control, so 15 decks in total, all of which are going to be budget-oriented, meaning the max, there's going to be no legendaries in any of these decks. The max epics, or the max epic I believe I've had in here is just one. And most decks just have rares and commons in them. There's no cards in any of the adventure modes, which means all of these cards are either from the basic set or from the expansions, but all of them are just commons and rares. Like, you don't have to worry about opening wings of adventure modes to unlock like Tomb Pillager or Quick Shot or anything like that. So I've built these decks in a way that it makes it very easy for a beginner to intermediate player to kind of look at these, look at the core of the deck and kind of build around that. And then a lot of the rares I've put in these decks are found in a lot of popular decks that are currently being run on ladder. So when you're building these decks, you're also building cards that are found in a lot of other decks. So it's not like you're just building a card and it only working in one specific deck. I've made it so, you know, that card can fit into a bunch of others. So you're not really, I wouldn't say wasting your dust, but you're using it to only build, you know, one type of deck when actually you've now expanded your horizons to multiple other decks. So with that, again, this is my personal preference. These are my built decks. You can change cards as you see fit. This is not set in stone, but if I were a beginner to intermediate player, these would be the decks that I'm running, and I'll kind of go over the deck list, why I have what in it and what not. So the first deck we're going to talk about is going to be, of course, the Warlock deck, and that's going to be the Zoo Warlock, which I wouldn't really call it in like a face deck, because that's not what this deck is trying to do. This deck is trying to build up a very sizable board full of very resilient, cheap costing minions. From there, now that you have board control, then you go face. But this deck doesn't have like the whole lot of burst. I guess the max burst you could do would be like Doomguard or Soulfire Doomguard or Doomguard Power Overwhelming. That's not really a lot of burst in comparison to some other decks like Shaman or Hunter, for example. So this deck plays a little bit different. You're able to play all of these cheap costing minions extremely efficiently because of your hero power, which says pay 2 mana, draw 1 card. So that basically allows you to keep the gas rolling and you basically never run out of steam. Unlike other decks like Hunter, where the hero power does not allow you to draw, and then there's not a whole lot of draw in the deck as is. So it's very difficult once you run out of cards in decks like Hunter to be able to refill your hand, but in Warlock you really don't have that problem, which makes this deck very good. Unfortunately, this deck, based from when remember guys, when I'm making this video and when you're watching the video are 2 different times. So at the moment, Zoo Warlock is not one of the, whenever you're playing against Warlock right now, you're thinking Reno Warlock or a control-based Warlock. Nobody's really playing the Zoo Warlock. So when you actually play this deck on ladder, or a deck like it, you actually will be able to take your opponent by surprise, and they might have mulliganed against more of a control-based deck. And then when you find that you're running a more aggressive-based deck, you actually could get a sweet advantage off that. So that's the basis of this deck. The cards in it, again, are based around you having cheap, resilient minions, really hard to remove, and then you can be able to kind of nitpick your opponent down once you have the board control. And yeah, and some of the bigger minions, Doomguard and your Darkshire Councilman, are kind of your big swingers. The Darkshire Councilman buffs every time you play a minion, and the Doomguard is good burst damage. Unfortunately, with the Melkazar's Imp, I haven't included Silverware Golem because, again, that is an adventure card, and I don't want to put it for budget-based decks, guys. I don't want to throw in a bunch of adventure cards or legendaries or epics because a lot of new players and intermediate players don't have those cards. So, again, this video is targeting the beginner to intermediate, not you veteran players. You don't need to worry about this. You've already built all of the best decks. You don't need to, you know, work with these decks. Not that these decks can't win, it's just these are toned down a bit, and you definitely should still be able to pull off wins with these decks easily up until rank 10, in my opinion. I mean, when we were playing our free-to-play account, we were getting very close to rank 10 without actually trying to grind ladder or anything like that. So the next one's going to be Face Hunter. Again, a very this, unlike the Warlock deck we just went over, this deck doesn't actually have to have any creatures on the board to be able to do damage to your opponent, and especially burst damage. So at the beginning of the games with Face Hunter, You're going to be hoping for your 1 and 2 drops, so playing your Alley Cats, your Argent Squires, your Fiery Bats, curving into, Flame Juggler, Knife Jugglers, Animal Companions. From there, you're going to have your weapons, your secrets, and your kill commands, along with Unleash the Hounds, to be able to do burst damage to your opponent, along with weaving in your hero power as much as you possibly can without giving up too much on the board. And of course, the Hunter hero power. You pay 2 mana, deal 2 damage. So you're sacrificing 2 mana to deal 2 damage. You're not actively gaining any board control. You're not getting card advantage like Warlock. You're merely killing your opponent faster, which is what this deck is supposed to do, is kill your opponent as fast as possible, which is why the curve of this deck ends at turn 4, because you need to make sure you have a creature on 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you have a nice curve, you're able to fit in a lot of damage, you're most likely going to be able to burst your opponent out. I want to say by turn 6. Normally, if the game lasts longer than turn, I want to say 6 or 7, and you start running out of steam, you don't have a lot of cards in your hand, this deck will lose, which is why, again, this is a very fast-paced deck, needs to win in the early stages of the game, and if not, and you kind of lose control, then this deck, that's the weakness to the aggro aggressive-based decks, right? As eventually you run out of steam, and then the control decks will just win you over there. But this deck, unlike other decks, it has a lot of burst in between Kill Command, Unleash the Hound. The Hound Masters allow you to keep your creatures on the board. The Infested Wolves are nice. A good question is going to be, why is Karen Grub in here instead of Wolf Rider? Wolf Rider has charge, Karen Grub has not. Right now, we're seeing a lot of cards in the meta with about 1 to 2 HP and about 3 to 2 attack, which means if you run Wolf, you are going to be able to deal 3 damage face immediately, but the problem is it's going to die to a 1/1, and this deck already doesn't go for a lot of value. So if you can get outvalued by just 1/1 creatures, it's going to look really bad against Pirate Warrior. So I built this in a way that it still has burst, it still has the potential to deal a lot of damage over time and efficiently and over a course of 1 turn, but it also has the ability to sustain in the early game and not just die to really small minions, like Wolf Rider into a 1/1 pirate or a 2/1 pirate. Like the Karen Grub is going to be something your opponent's going to need to get rid of, because every turn they're taking 2, and then on top of that you can Hound Master it, make it, not that it's supposed to be a mid-range or control hunter, but giving your Karen Grub a Hound Master isn't the worst thing in the world for a face hunter. Especially when playing another face deck, you building up a sizable taunt that their deck just can't get past, first of all, or they're going to have to trade a lot of creatures into, just gives you more board control, which allows other creatures to attack, to therefore make up the damage that your creature didn't do because it didn't have charge. So I've built it in a way that I think this is good against any other aggressive based deck, but again, of course, we're not running any epics or legendaries or anything like that. These are very budget based decks, so just keep that in mind. Also, the dust count as we move across these decks is going to go up, the cheapest being the Zoo Warlock, the second most, or the cheapest being the Warlock, and as we move up, the dust cost will increase over time. But it still doesn't, I don't think it gets past 3,000, which still isn't a lot of dust in comparison to some of the decks that are out on ladder. So this is going to be the infamous Pirate Warrior, a very, very powerful deck on ladder right now. It's played by a ton of different people, and the deck is very good. So if you're looking to just build a super solid deck that's going to win a lot of games and win them quickly, I think this, out of all of the decks that we're going to cover, besides maybe Shaman, are a good way to look, due to the fact that the deck is just extremely cheap and it's just extremely good, due to all the pirate synergy. Again, a lot of you may ask, where's Patches? He's a legendary. These are budget-based decks. Like I know there's gonna be comments that are like, why isn't this in the deck? Why isn't that in the deck? And the answer all comes down to, this is a budget deck guide, or deck. These are budget deck guys. So just, again, keep that in mind. Trying to minimize those comments. So this deck, it kind of combines the elements of the Face Hunter and the Zoo Warlock, because this deck has the ability to not only swarm the field with very, I wouldn't say resilient minions, but powerful minions. The Bloodsail Raider, the Frothing Berserker, the Dread Corsair, all these are cheap minions that if unchecked will win you the game. On top of that, you have weapon synergy. So you have cards like the Upgrade, which allows your weapon to get +1/+1, which may not seem like a big deal, but all of a sudden that your weapon, your 3/2 Fiery War Axe, has all of a sudden turned into a 4/3, which not only is going to deal an additional 1 attack because you've upgraded it from the first attack, but it also has another durability, which is going to make it deal even more damage and stick around that much longer. So you can either go face or make trades. And And on top of that, this deck has the burst potential with spells with Heroic Strike and Mortal Strike, and it has the creature potential with charge with the Elite and the Argent Commander, which is, again, a replacement for Leroy Jenkins because Argent Commander is a rare, while Leroy Jenkins is a legendary card, which, again, fits into the budget category. So right here, very solid deck. May not be the most fun to pilot because each turn, I mean, there will be a sizable amount of options for you guys to pick through each turn, but I would have to say the more aggressive base decks, which we're talking about in this episode, the amount of, I don't want to say skill because these decks do require skill to pilot at high legend levels or even high ranked levels if you're playing 1 through 5, but as we move towards the more control decks, that's where you kind of get into your it's more important to know the matchup, exactly what your game plan is, what your opponent's going to do. With these aggressive base decks, most games end before turn 6, which means you're missing out on like 2/3 of the match, which normally you need to know a lot more information about the game. But in this situation, these aggressive base decks, they don't require you to know that. The next one's going to be an aggressive based rogue deck. You could call it Pirate Rogue, but there's really not a whole lot of pirates in it. It's a very simplistic version of the deck I hit legend with last season, which would be my random rogue deck list. So I basically took that deck list, toned it down, took out the rogue legendaries, Leroy Jenkins, a lot of the epics, and like I said, legendaries. And then from there, we've added in cards like the Argent Squire, the Ooze, the Undercity Valiant, which aren't bad cards. They're actually really nice in this meta, especially the Undercity Valiant, which allows you to kill or deal 1 damage. And like I said, there's a lot of cards in this meta running around with 1 or 2 HP, so you're going to actually be able to get a lot of value out of cards like Undercity Valiant and things of that nature. So I want to say this is very similar to the Pirate Warrior, but it doesn't have those same similarities because it doesn't revolve around weapons and upgrading your weapons and comboing weapons with creatures. This deck more along the lines of has a lot of randomness to it with cards like Undercity Huckster, so maybe knowing the cards that you're in your opponent's class and how to synergize those is very important, but it still has the onboard burst with the Cold Blood and Eviscerate and things of that nature. So it definitely still has the same amount of burst as Pirate Warrior, but just take away the weapons and basically add combo pieces like SI Agent, Defender of Argus, Azure Drake, and things of that nature. So again, I would have to say this deck, I don't want to say is going to perform a lot worse than the Pirate Warrior, but this deck would probably be a lot more fun than the Pirate Warrior deck, but it may not be as consistent due to the fact that it's not a tier 1 deck, unlike Pirate Warrior is right now. Moving to the next class, we're going to take a look at Shaman. This is our last aggressive base deck, and again, one of the more prominent, powerful decks right now on ladder. So if I would have had to pick 2 decks in between everything, I would probably pick the Pirate Warrior and the aggressive base Shaman if you're only looking to ladder and level up. But if you're just looking to have fun, the random rogue is always a suggestion I throw out new players because that's just a really fun deck. So this one is going to follow the same route as, I want to say, a mixture in between the Pirate Warrior and, I want to say Mage, but it's not exactly like Mage, and I say Mage because we have a lot of spells in the deck. We've got cards like Jade Lightning, Lava Burst, Lightning Bolt, and Rock Biter, and all of those deal direct damage to your opponent's face most of the time unless you're trading. You also have cards like Bloodlust, which is huge amounts of burst, which is why I've added it, is to beat the control matchup. And this again is going to be the most expensive list we talk about because it has the card Doomhammer, and the reason Doomhammer is on the list is because we can play Rock Biter, and Rock Biter says give whatever +3 attack this turn, and Rockbiter with Doomhammer for 2 mana, and if you already have Doomhammer equipped, you add Rockbiter and you can do 10 damage for basically 2 mana, which is insane burst on top of already having a ton of spells and a lot of powerful minions. So in this deck, curving out is very important. The 4-drop 7/7 will win you a lot of games. The Doomhammer will win you a lot of games. And then just having the overall, just a ton of spells that deal direct face damage will win you a lot of games. So this deck, another one of those decks, it's very powerful. This deck list is very similar to what you're going to see a lot of Legend players playing. The only difference is it doesn't have Patches and it doesn't have Aya Blackpaw, which again are 2 legendaries. And I don't want to put them in here because this is a budget-based deck. So we basically replaced those with cards like the Ooze and the Argent Squire, which are still really good in the early game and can curve out extremely well. Alrighty, so with that said, if you have any questions about these deck lists or guides, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. A lot of these decks can be found on our deck guide page, and if I haven't covered them, I'm going to cover them soon because they're very popular decks. So if you're looking to like a deeper insight into exactly how to play the deck, more so just what the deck can do, look at our deck guide section and our deck testing section. There'll probably be something similar to it, if not exactly what you're looking for there. And then there'll be mid-range coming after this, guys, and then after that will be control. And then when the new set comes out, I'll update all of these decks for you guys, so you can keep up to date with kind of the best budget-based decks to play currently in the meta. So, as always, thanks for stopping by. Hopefully you've enjoyed and have fun on ladder with these decks. I'm Warshack, of course, and happy whatever the hell day it is.